We're going to be in Matthew the 5th chapter, beginning in verse 13 through 16. Up to this point, we know that Jesus had come proclaiming that the kingdom of heaven was at hand and the people need to repent. And the first lesson that Matthew records for us from Jesus is a message about the kingdom of heaven and what it means to be a righteous person. And he has described in the first few verses the essential character of someone who is a citizen in the kingdom of heaven, that we are to be a people who are poor in spirit, that we mourn for that which is sinful, that we are meek, that we hunger and thirst for righteousness, that we are merciful, that we are pure in heart, peacemakers, and we rejoice even in persecution. But he doesn't just stop there with the message of who we are. That's a good starting point, that those kind of people are the ones who are blessed, who are approved by God. But he has a job for us to do. He has a purpose, and we can't stay living in some kind of splendid isolation. God intends as a purpose for us that we go out into the world with the same message that he had, that the kingdom of heaven, for us, the kingdom of heaven is here. You need to repent, and you can be a part of that kingdom, and you can be reconciled, and through Jesus Christ, your sins can be forgiven, and you can be one of his children. He has a very clear purpose and function for us, that we are to go out into the world so to do good. And there's a sense in which, because of the very character that we have, we can't help it. This is who we are, and when we're in the world, this is showing the world his character. So let's read Matthew the 5th chapter, verses 13 through 16. He says there, "You are the salt of the earth, but if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven." So Jesus tells us that we are salt and light, but in talking about this, clearly he's saying that we have to go out into the world. I want you to turn with me to John the 17th chapter. John the 17th chapter is a part of Jesus' prayer for the disciples as he's getting ready to leave them. He prays for what will happen with them. John 17, we're going to start in verse 14, just a small part of the prayer. He says, concerning the disciples, "I have given them your word, and the world has hated them because they are not of the world, just as I am not of the world. I do not ask that you take them out of the world, but that you keep them from the evil one. They are not of the world, just as I am not of the world. Sanctify them in truth. Your word is true. As you sent me into the world, so I have sent them into the world. And for their sake I consecrate myself, that they also may be sanctified in truth." Clearly in this passage, Jesus is looking out for what's going to be happening with the disciples. You notice one of the things that he says is they are not of the world. So I don't want you to take them out of it. I need to kind of pause here. We all have to understand that when Jesus says world in this passage, and I'm not helping things by putting a picture of the earth up there, but he's not talking about the physical world. It's obvious that the disciples were in the world. They existed on the planet Earth just like we do. He's using the word world in this place to talk about a system, a way of thinking that was introduced to us by the devil that's completely different from the godly way of thinking. The world in this case is that way of thinking that is opposed to God in all things. And really, because it's opposed to God, it's opposed to what's best for man, and it's opposed to what is right and just. And so when he says of the world in this place, he's not speaking of the physical world. He's talking about the society that we live in, that for the most part, everything in our society is in opposition to God. And he says, of the disciples, they're not of the world. Because of the teaching, because of their following of Jesus, they're no longer a part of that system. They've turned back to God and they're seeking after him. So he says they're not of the world. But he says, I don't want you to take them out of it. So we have to live in this society. We have to be a part of it. God has sent us to be a part of this world. I do like in verse 15 how he specifies, keep them from the evil one. So protect them, watch over them from Satan. But as he goes on, you'll notice in verse 16, again he says, they're not of the world. They're not a part of this system that rebels against God. Sanctify them, he says, and he says, just as you sent me into the world, I'm sending them into the world. We're a part of it. To me, that's vital for us as Christians to understand that we are sent into the world. We're not supposed to have some kind of separation from it. We live in this same environment. We're not told that we're to draw ourselves out of society. So the whole idea of being a hermit is not about what Jesus is talking about, where we can go away. So we have this very careful line that we have to walk. We're in the world, but we're not of the world. We're a part of it. I wonder if this was a worthy analogy. It's like being in the water, but not of the water. You know, the deep sea divers, when they go down in those suits, the water never touches them because the suits that they're wearing completely protect them from water. Yeah, they're surrounded by water. They're in the ocean, but they're not of the ocean. They're separate from it. Does that work? That's kind of the situation we're in. We're in this society that's opposed to God in so many ways, that rejoices in evil and does things that are wrong, and yet we're in it, but we're not to be a part of it. We can influence it because of that. So we're not to be like the world. We are to change it. And we change the world by being salt and being light. We are that person. And in fact, I think we're to glory in the fact that we're different from the world. This is a wonderful thing. We have been brought back into the right relationship with God. He promised us that we would have an abundant life. We're free in the fullest sense of the word. So it shouldn't surprise people that we are noticeably different from them. You are the salt of the earth. All of us have heard this lesson, right? You're the salt of the earth. And almost always when we do this lesson, there's 3 points made about salt, and it's used for 3 purposes. One is preservation. You know, in the old days, way longer than I ever knew, they used to pack meats in salt to preserve it. So I guess it was really salty bacon, but you know, it was preserved that way. And from Luke, we can see that sometimes salt is used as a fertilizer, although I never understood that because we usually don't use it that way. And then in Colossians, it's used as seasoning. So we've all heard this, right? So Christians are to be agents of change. You're the salt of the earth. It brings out the flavor, the right flavor. It preserves food, makes it what it should be. It prepares the ground. We bring out what's best in all aspects of society. And now that may be true, that we are to affect those who are around us in very real ways. If you are in your neighborhood and there's a group of neighbors who are talking inappropriately, and you enter as a Christian, as a disciple of Christ, and they stop talking about what they were talking about, without even saying anything, the people have changed their behavior for the better just because of who you are. That's a sense of being an influence on the society. So we know that part. And you're the light of the earth. He tells us that also in this passage, that you're the light of the earth, light of the world. The essence of salt is to be salt. The essence of light is to be light. Light is outward. And as much as as salt is the character of salt is saltiness. It's kind of inward. It's who it is. Salt is outward. It shines out into things. So my light must shine. And as I was reading this passage this time, I came to a realization that most of the time when I've explained this lesson, I really haven't talked about what Jesus is really warning us about. The more I think about it, Jesus is not just saying you're salt and you influence the world, and you're light and you shine in the world of darkness. Jesus is giving really a very clear warning to the disciples in this passage. There is a great danger that as we go out into the world, we don't act as salt and we won't be light. And our tendency is toward that. Most of what Jesus says in these verses is warning that we don't act like salt and that we don't act like light. And that should be very concerning to us. The world, this society that's opposed to God, is going to want us to corrupt our character, to change our character just in small ways. What they would say is insignificant ways, to convince us that it's okay to be more like the world. And so often what happens is we go out into the world, and instead of us changing the world changes us. And that's what Jesus is warning us about. The purpose of salt is to be salty. The purpose of light is to shed light. We are citizens of the kingdom of heaven, so we must always act and live as disciples of Jesus Christ, as citizens of that kingdom. We are saints, so we have to always be saintly in the things that we do. Did you notice in this passage, he actually says, but if salt has lost its taste, I've always wondered about how does that happen? The salt would lose its taste. You just talk to just about any chemist, and they'll tell you that salt, sodium chloride, is of itself a very stable element. You keep it dry, it's sodium chloride. Nothing changes that. It's a very stable compound. But the salt that Jesus had, the people of Israel had at that time, wasn't pure sodium chloride. A lot of the salt came from the Dead Sea. And guess what was in the Dead Sea besides salt? It's just like any kind of water that's like that. There's all kinds of brine, there's all kinds of compounds, there's gypsum, there's things like that in it. So there was a sense in which some people, you could say, that the salt would lose its saltiness because the salt wasn't pure. And so if you had some salt stored and it got a little wet, the salt dissolves out of it and you're left with gypsum or some compound or something like that. And then what do you do with it? You throw it out because it's not salty anymore. But the key to this passage is, what is the purpose of the salt? To be salty. What's the purpose of the light? To be light, to shine, to drive away the darkness. You go back to Genesis 1 verse 15, when God created the sun and the moon, what did he say about them? Let them be lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light upon the earth. Even in this passage, it gives light to all who are in the house. It can't be hidden. It's not to be put under a basket. So here's my question. Have you lost your saltiness? I know in a different context, that might be a good thing, the way that the term is used for sailors. Are you the saint that Jesus would have you to be? And the way that you live every day, do you have that character? Do you have your saltiness? Are you hiding your light? Do you manifest that character, shine so that all can see? So the question I want us to ask this morning is, how are you hiding your light? It's amazing to me how easily we hide from the world. And I think we almost have creative ways of hiding. Just the idea of we almost hide in plain sight. Everyone knows I'm a Christian, that they should just ask me if they want to know something. I know most of you think And you're correct if you're thinking this. If you go over to Romans, the 12th chapter, you knew I'd get here eventually, right? Romans, the 12th chapter and verse 2. What does he tell us there? Romans 12 and verse 2, the Apostle Paul writes, "Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect." So one way in which we hide is that we conform to the world. And the way that I'm thinking about it in this case is kind of that blending in thing, where it's really hard to see us. You can't really tell the difference between me and anyone else in society because I blend in just so well. Of course, Paul in this passage also is warning us, don't be conformed to the world. Don't be outwardly like the world. You need to be different. You need this transformation. Really, that transformed mind is the very character Jesus has been talking about in the Beatitudes, isn't it? We need that transformed mind, but that needs to be seen in the world. So one of the things I think he's warning, don't just blend in. And there's a lot of ways that we can blend in. One is that we just match the world so we're not recognizable. The other is to blend in by acting like the world, to follow their same kind of behavior. In the book of 1 Peter, Peter warned those Christians also. 1 Peter 1 and in verse 14, he said to them, "As obedient children, do not be conformed to the passions of your former ignorance, that as he who called you is holy, you also be holy in all your conduct." And it reminds me that sometimes we can be like that school of fish. It's always amazing to me on those nature programs where there's a huge bunch of fish, with one turns right, they all go right. And, they make beautiful patterns. But a lot of times, isn't that what we do in the world? The world swerves this way, so I just go along with it. And the world swerves that way, and I swerve along with it. I just blend in my behavior with them. I've conformed to my behavior. So even though I may look different in some ways, there's a little different fish in there. He's not the same kind. But they don't notice any difference. I'm just going along with the world. Peter says, don't be conformed to those passions. Be holy. Choose to follow after him correctly. John put it this way in 1 John, the 2nd chapter, and verse 15. He says, "Do not love the world or the things in the world, for if anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him." It's so easy that we get focused on this life and fitting in with this world. Jesus told us, I quoted it a little while ago, Jesus, as the Good Shepherd, said, "I came to give them so they could have life and have it abundantly." That's what he's promised us. Do you remember what he said before that? He said concerning the thief, he comes to kill, to steal, and to destroy. And the problem that we have is that from a very young age, we're taught to conform to the world in certain ways. We're trained to conform in a lot of ways. And then when we come along and we need to change in the most important ways, so that we're not like a society that rebels against God, but rather we are his people, we struggle with that so much. Like I said, it's a fine line. We are not of the world, but we are sent into the world. But we can't just blend in. Don't conform to the world. Be different. Are you hiding by conforming to the world in some way? Another way I think that sometimes we hide ourselves is we're kind of like the turtle that draws into its shell. When we think of our faith as being it's a very private faith. My faith is just between me and God, and that's as far as no one else needs to know. And so we find a very comfortable place. And many people will even turn to passages like Matthew, the 6th chapter, that Matthew, the 6th chapter, is still in the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus is warning us about the kind of prayers that we give. And he says in Matthew 6, verse 6, But when you pray, go into your room and shut the door. Pray to your Father who's in secret, and your Father who's in secret will reward you. See, my faith is private, just me and God. No one else needs to know, so I just pull into my shell and hide from the world and think that that's okay. And you know what? That really ends up being not just a private faith, but taken to the extreme, it eventually becomes an inactive faith. I don't invite anyone to study the Bible with me. You know, maybe I don't even study the Bible much anymore. I don't invite anyone to come to church with me. We don't make it. It's just me and God, and eventually that just kind of fizzles in some ways. One part of the step is, that kind of 1 hour a week Christianity, where I put in my appearance at the building, and that's all that I do. And I don't want to be extreme, right? If we're doing that, we're minimizing the salt and the light, aren't we? We believe, maybe the way we would say this, I believe, but I'm not a fanatic about it. Is that not a way of blending in with the world? Because if we're not shining, if we're not being salty, they can't see Christ. Sometimes we blend, I know the picture doesn't necessarily fit with this, but by the way that we talk, by the way that we don't talk, by our silence. Colossians, the 4th chapter and verse 6, is where the Apostle Paul was speaking, warning us about the way that we talk. Colossians 4, verse 6, he says, "Let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, that you may know how you ought to answer each person." We're going to be talking. So the question is, do we blend in with the world by our speech patterns? Do we sound like the world? Do the things that we talk about are the things the world talks about? The passage that we read a little bit earlier in Ephesians, the 5th chapter, that Joey read, did you notice that it even made the point that the things that the people of the world do, it's even shameful to speak about? And yet we're living in a society where it feels like we've convinced ourselves it's okay to talk about anything. Are our words like the words of the world? Have we adopted the way of talking of the world? That's one danger, but the other extreme is that we're careful not to sound over-religious also. We don't mention Jesus. We don't talk about the Bible. We don't bring up things about moral authority. We don't praise God. Now, if you're in the hospital or sick, then I'll throw in, I'll pray you at the end of the conversation. I'll pray for you. But we don't overdo it. Are we being salt and light when we do that? Let's go to Philippians. Philippians, the 2nd chapter. And in verse 14. More about the speech. It says, "Do all things without grumbling or disputing, that you may be blameless and innocent children of God, without blemish in the midst of a crooked and twisted generation, among whom you shine as lights in the world, holding fast to the word of life, so that in the day of Christ I may be proud that I did not run in vain or labor in vain. Even if I am to be poured out as a drink offering upon the sacrificial offering of your faith, I am glad and rejoice with you. Likewise, you also should be glad and rejoice with me." He draws a very clear connection here with our speech and the witness that we have to the world. When he says, "Do all things without grumbling or disputing, so that you're blameless children of God, among whom you shine as lights in a crooked and perverse generation." If you are constantly complaining and grumbling, the world sees no difference between you and them. You can blend into the world by being someone who constantly sees the bad in all things. And if you're constantly grumbling, why would someone say, "I want to be a follower of Jesus"? They don't see any reason. Your light's not shining by the very words that you say. Or, as he goes on to say, if you're grumbling or disputing, if you're that kind of person who's constantly arguing, constantly in someone's face, constantly has to be right about everything. Again, the danger is that if you speak that way to people in the world, he says that you have this blemish. You're hiding yourself. You're hiding the light. You're fitting in with a crooked and perverse generation. What a danger that is. Another one that I want to bring up is, and I wasn't sure about how to talk about this, but one where we almost, unlike what Jesus said, where we've been sent into the world, we hold ourselves out of the world. We feel like we're like lights shining down on the world. And that's arrogant. Where we're above it all. And we're looking down. And the world has a term for that. It's called holier than thou. A phrase, not a word. They have an expression for that. Holier than thou. We can hurt our light and saltiness by constantly looking down on people. Turn with me to Matthew the 11th chapter. In Matthew the 11th chapter, it's talking about how people reacted to John the Baptist when he came teaching, and Jesus when he came teaching. And this is Jesus talking. We're going to start reading in verse 18. Let's start in verse 16. He says, "But to what shall I compare this generation? It's like children sitting in the marketplace and calling to their playmates. We played the flute for you, and you did not dance. We sang a dirge, and you did not mourn. For John came neither eating nor drinking, and they say, he has a demon." So the people looked at John, and they criticized him. John did not fit in society. He was out in the desert, and he was dressed in camel's hair clothes, and he ate locusts and honey. He didn't fit in. So the world looked at him, and what did they say? He's got a demon. Verse 19. The Son of Man, now Jesus is talking about himself when he says the Son of Man. But the Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they say, look at him, a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. Yet wisdom is justified by her deeds. Now, I realize that in part what Jesus is saying about that generation, which is true of this generation, is it doesn't matter what you do, somebody's going to criticize you for something. Because exactly the same things were going on. But what I want you to focus on is what Jesus did. Jesus did come eating and drinking. And Jesus did spend time with the tax collectors. And Jesus did spend time with the sinners. He didn't take himself and hold himself separate and apart. And if anyone had a right to be holier than thou, he is holy. He was without sin. He didn't do that. In fact, his whole purpose of coming to this earth was to be made like his brethren so that he could free us from death. He triumphed over it because he lived without sin. And so he joined himself together with those who were in the world. Brethren, are you doing that? Are you hanging out with the disreputable people? I think we forget sometimes that when they said tax collectors and sinners, they meant the bad people. Jesus was with the people who were in the world. You can't be salt and light. If you're above it all, you're not with them. And when Jesus was with those people, what did he do? He taught them the truth. He didn't fit in. He didn't compromise with them. He didn't try to be like them. He taught them the truth, and they loved him. At least some of them loved him for it. And they turned to him because he was among them. Don't hide yourself from the world by being above it all. Why do we hide? Why is it that we end up in this place where we hide ourselves from the world? I think sometimes it's because of fear. The judgment of friends, like we were just seeing in that passage, the judgment of other people, the assumptions that other people make about what it means to be a real Christian, and that's their definition of what it means to be a real Christian. The hypocrisy that we see in others, and sometimes that we know ourselves, we're not consistent in our lives. So sometimes we hide because we're afraid that if I let my light shine, people are going to say, yeah, but you're not really this. And I'm not sure exactly how to overcome that except to say, you're right, but he is. That our job really is not to say, well, look at me, look at who I am. It's to say, look at him, look at who he is. Look at what Jesus did for me, and he can do this for you. You can be saved. Sometimes it's as simple as that just we're shy. That I don't like to go out and be with other people. Sometimes, and this is one of the ones I struggle with, is I like to think, no laughing here, that I'm intellectual. And that, I spend my time studying, and that's the important thing. So I end up, if I'm not careful, it's all study and no action. And I feel like I'm doing a good thing, but I'm hiding, aren't I? And I hide behind that. I have to be so careful why we hide. So what's your basket? I've given you just a few examples that we know. My question is, what's your basket? Are you hiding your light? And it might be the church building. The only time that we're religious is when we're in here. It might be at my home, my office, my car. It might be how I act or how I don't act. But I'm asking you to take time this morning to ask yourself that question. What's my basket? What am I using to hide the light so it's not shining the way that it should? Jesus ended the passage with, let your light shine. And that's what I want to remind you of. Let's let our lives shine. In the book of Philippians, the passage that we read just a moment ago, Philippians 2, verse 14, he said, let your light shine among the world, holding fast to the word of life. Holding fast to the word of life. And isn't that just what Jesus did? He held on to God's righteousness, and he held on to God's purpose for him as he went through this life. He didn't fit in with the religious leaders. They were constantly trying to get him to change, or pointing out what he was doing wrong, or accusing him so other people wouldn't listen to him. But he stuck to the church. He held the truth. He held on tight to that. He made sure he spent time with the sinners, so that they could see he was different and they loved him. But he didn't ever try to be like them. He was in the world, but not of the world. And in part, he did let that light shine by holding fast to the word of truth. We can do the same. John the 13th chapter, verse 35, that same night when Jesus is betrayed, one of the things he tells his disciples, by this all people will know that you are my disciples. Now there's a clear statement about shining, isn't it? By this all people will know that you're my disciples. What does he say next? If you have love for one another. How we treat each other. And we need to take this outside of the church building because a lot of strangers don't come into here. The world doesn't come in here much. How do they see us loving each other? I want you to notice he doesn't say all people will know my disciples if you adhere strictly to the certain truth or teaching. He doesn't say that at all. He says they'll know your disciples when you love each other. And if the only time we see or do or interact with each other is when we're in a building, the world can't see that we love each other. Brethren, if our light's going to shine, we need to show that love to the world. And that's going to take some effort on our part. In 1 Peter, the 2nd chapter, in verse 12. 1 Peter, the 2nd chapter, verse 12. Peter tells those disciples, keep your conduct among the Gentiles honorable, so that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day of visitation. So one of the things that Peter says, the way you can let your light shine, is by having honorable conduct. That you live your life in a way that shows other people that you're a good person. In contrast to the cheaters and the liars and the things that we run into so often in the world, people trying to get ahead, promote themselves, we live in such a way that people see our character traits, we talked about already in the Beatitudes, and we follow after righteousness. We do that in everything that we do. And I really like what Paul says to the slaves in the book of Titus. In Titus, the 2nd chapter and verse 9. And for some reason, Titus has disappeared from my Bible right now. I don't know. There it is. All right. So in Titus, the 2nd chapter, I apologize for that. Jesus is giving instruction to those who are bondservants. He says to the bondservants, and these are bondservants who are Christians. Bondservants are to be submissive to their masters in everything. They're to be well-pleasing, not argumentative, not pilfering, but showing all good faith. So he's telling the slaves, even as a slave, you have a job of acting like a Christian. So he specifically says, do what your master says. Try to please the master. Don't argue with your master. Don't steal. Be reliable. And then he says, so that in everything they may adorn the doctrine of God our Savior. He's telling the slaves, by how you act, you can make the doctrine of Christ look good to your masters. You can adorn the doctrine. To adorn means to make it beautiful. You can make being a Christian attractive so that others want to hear it. They want to obey it. They want to live it. It's like a plate of food that's prepared and presented in a certain way. It's more appetizing than if it's all just thrown onto a plate. You can make the gospel. You can adorn it by how you live so that others want to be a part of that. You can make righteousness more desirable so that those who are hungering and thirsting for righteousness, they're going to seek it coming to you. You're going to say, tell us about this, and you can point them to Christ. Draw people to Jesus. You can adorn the gospel. You're drawing a moth to a flame. Matthew, the 5th chapter, verse 16, he very specifically says about letting your light shine so that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven. And I know there's a lot of, we can talk a lot about what those good works are, but I want to emphasize one in particular. Do something positive for other people. Find ways to help people. Serve in your community. Be a volunteer. Find ways in which you can be out among the people so that your light can shine and they can see what you're doing. In fact, to me, that's a lot of what the passage we read earlier in Ephesians is talking about. Did you notice that he said that we are to walk as children of light, that we are children of light, we're light in the Lord, walk as children of light. Try to do what's pleasing to the Lord. And he says the time is short, so look carefully how you walk. You're the light. Walk in the world and show that to the people of the world. Be filled with the Spirit. He talks even at the end how we interact with each other. It goes back to the love that we have for each other as disciples, addressing one another in psalms and hymns, people who give thanks for everything always. That goes back to the right kind of speech, submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ. We need to be that kind of people. So what's your basket? Let your light shine, and let all the glory be to our Father who saves us. It's all about Him. We want to offer an opportunity this morning for anyone who's not a child of God. If you'd like to, because you believe in Him, repent of your sins and be baptized, we want to help you with that. An understanding or or in getting things ready for you, we're happy to help. If you have that desire, please come forward as we stand and sing.